serial predator who uses wealth and influence to exploit underage girls, given little more than a slap of the wrist. Who else should be held accountable? And what must we continue to do to make sure this never happens again? We owe the survivors and the public the answers and more. And with that, I thank you and I yield back.
Thank you. Thank you, Congresswoman. We're going to, of course, hear some opening testimony from survivors and advocates who will speak about the failure of our justice system to protect them, others, and certainly to hold Epstein and so many others accountable. They're going to each provide some opening remarks. I do want to introduce them briefly. We're going to hear from Danny Bensky, who is an advocate, dance, teaching artist, choreographer, and Epstein survivor. As an educator of the arts, Danny's advocacy derives from creating a safer world for her students and future generations. She is a public speaker and hopes that by sharing her story, we can get an inside perspective into grooming and how abuse can happen and how systems fail people. Danny was abused by Jeffrey Epstein in 2004 and 2005 when she was just 17 years old and working as a dancer in New York City. She has since spoken out about the government's handling of the case and has pursued legal action. And of course, the amount of courage is incredible. And I want to thank, of course, Danny for being here. We'll also hear from Rosa. Rosa is testifying under her first name and under that name only, just for her own safety. She was recruited in Uzbekistan by a modeling agent, co-conspirator, and brought to the US with promises of a career. She met Jeffrey Epstein in 2009 and was abused over several years. With her immigration status used to keep her from leaving, Rosa is a fighter, a coach, a wife, and a stepmother. And her courage, of course, is immense, and we want to thank Rosa for being here. We're going to hear from Courtney Wild, who was abused by Jeffrey Epstein in Palm Beach beginning at the age of 14. Courtney is a mom, advocate, and survivor. She later brought a lawsuit against the federal government over the non-prosecution agreement that allowed Epstein to avoid federal charges. And she will speak about its lasting impact on survivors. We're also going to hear from Jenna Lisa Jones, who was abused by Jeffrey Epstein in Florida when she was 14 years old. She has spoken publicly about her experience and about her disappointment with the failure to fully release information related to this case. She is a mom, a wife, and a founding survivor of Survivors, Inc. We're going to also hear from Spencer Kuvan, who is an attorney who represented some of the earliest survivors to come forward against Epstein, and he has spent years advocating on behalf of victims. He will speak about the failures in the original prosecution and the impact those failures have had on survivors. We'll also hear from Lauren Hirsch, who's a former prosecutor and an advocate working to combat trafficking and exploitation. She will discuss the ongoing efforts by survivors and advocates to seek accountability and justice. We will also hear from Maria Farmer by video, who's the first person to report Jeffrey Epstein's abuse to authorities in 1996. She'll be providing video testimony. Finally, Sky and Amanda Roberts are here. We all, of course, know their incredible courage, and they'll be reading a brief statement as well. We will continue, of course, to honor Virginia's memory, her legacy, and her tireless fight for justice. I want to especially thank the witnesses for being here and for your enormous courage. You are doing, obviously, a service, not just to all of the women and girls that have suffered, but to every single American woman and American girl in this country who need to be believed and who need to know that when they report a horror against them, that their government is going to believe them and is going to stand up for them. And so thank you for your courage today. I now are going to hear a video that Maria Farmer wanted folks to hear about. And so we're going to go ahead and play that. So Ms.
My
Farmer
name is Maria Farmer. I am the whistleblower who reported Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, Les Wexner, and others to the FBI 30 years ago in 1996. Today, I apologize for my appearance. I was not well enough to attend this hearing in person and have recently been released from the hospital. That's the result of 30 years of fighting. For 3 decades, I've carried a weight that no survivor should ever have to bear. I reported what I believed were heinous crimes against children, and these individuals responsible were involved in an international pedophile ring. I reported their crimes in real time, and the government continues to ignore me to this day. In 1996, I reported Epstein and his co-conspirators to my local New York City 6th precinct. The commanding officer told me local police could only address the local arson crimes, and he instructed me to immediately report the whole story, spanning several states, to the FBI. He told me that it was vitally important that I tell the whole story to the FBI, which I did. The FBI asked me questions, said they were familiar with some of the perpetrators I identified, and gave me every reason to believe they would respond. That failure, that single moment when law enforcement refused to take action, set off a cascade of injustice and grave repercussions to my sisters, my family, and so many others, and to me personally, including my health and well-being. The FBI's decades of failure and inaction led to countless more girls and young women suffering abuse and trauma that could have been prevented. Individuals like Virginia Giuffre, Anushka DeGiorgio, Shantae Davies, Marika Chartoni, Danny Bensky, Jenna Lisa Jones, Ashley Rubright, and Jennifer Rose, among others. Each survivor represents a life changed forever, suffering that could have been spared if the FBI had done their job in 1996. The failures did not stop there. In 2006, the FBI tracked me down, stating that they searched for me because they knew I had reported Epstein 10 years earlier and no one else had. They urged me to testify in a federal criminal trial against Epstein and his co-conspirators, and they promised that they would get him this time. I trusted them again, relied upon them again, and they betrayed me again. Rather than following through with their promises, the government offered Epstein a sweetheart deal and shielded powerful individuals from accountability. And they persist in granting special treatment to certain people to this day. I have received death threats from Maxwell and her associates, including one instance where they threatened to burn my apartment down. And those threats have not stopped. I have been subjected to more than 3 decades of ongoing harassment, vicious challenges to my truthfulness, and real danger from internet instigators, trolls, and more. Meanwhile, my numerous efforts to obtain my 1996 report from the FBI have been rejected time and again. In 2023, I wrote a letter to the government asking for an investigation of the government's actions or inactions in response to my 1996 report. The Inspector General replied saying they were busy with other things, would get back to me, and they never did. I sent multiple FOIA requests for my FBI report records. In January 2025, in response to my most recent request, the government said that they would get back to me in November of 2027, a delay of 3 years. I finally received a letter saying they looked at my complaint, took some kind of action, and the matter was addressed, but what they did was a secret. With no other choice, I filed an administrative claim against the government and then a lawsuit. Since then, virtually nothing has happened, and I'm left waiting and wondering what is next. With the passage of the Epstein Files Transparency Act, after years of efforts to get my records, an FD 71 form was released for the first time, confirming just a small part of my 1996 whistleblower report and vindicating some of what I had said for years. However, the full extent of what I told the FBI was not in that document, so the release of the Epstein files provides only partial relief for me. Where is the evidence I provided of my sexual assault and that of my sister Annie? Why won't the FBI release my full report? The failures of those sworn to protect us have overwhelmed me. Doing my civic duty has cost me dearly. The stress of this trauma, the government hiding and refusing to turn over written confirmation of my 96 report, along with the ongoing harassment and death threats, have contributed to me developing serious health issues, including Hodgkin's lymphoma, a brain tumor, and recently Addison's disease. In the last month, I have spent 23 nights in hospitals, including multiple nights in the ICU. Along with my health, it has robbed me of my career. In 1996, I was fresh out of graduate school and living a life that I had always dreamed, creating and selling art in New York City. When I was assaulted, threatened, held captive, my career was halted, and the trajectory of my life was thrown off course. So many others had their dreams shattered by these crimes, and they could have been prevented. Individuals like Virginia Giuffre, who is the backbone of this case and remains the inspiration behind this fight. She's the reason my sister and I came forward publicly so we could stand together. She faced also relentless attacks to her credibility online, yet she fought. While Virginia may no longer be physically beside us, she's been our shining star and guiding light and remains so today. The rest of humanity owes it to her legacy to continue this quest. We are still walking down the trail that Virginia blazed for us, so let me be direct about what we need. The federal government owes us explanations, accountability for injuries caused, and a promise of systemic change when crimes against children are reported. Accountability should start with the government's acknowledgement and responsibility for their repeated failures to act in response to my 1996 report. The government needs to take responsibility for endangering and injuring girls and young women. The government needs to start telling the truth, face my lawsuit, and be held to account to me and to all others who have been harmed. Had the FBI done their job, 30 years of child sex abuse and trauma could have been avoided. I want my full FBI file, including the 96 and 2006 reports, including my art. We also need the FBI and the Department of Justice to fully investigate every lead in this case. We need investigation and prosecution of everyone responsible, both men and women. This includes the officials who enabled the 2008 sweetheart deal, the other perpetrators, and the many co-conspirators, and anyone who is currently shielding powerful individuals from justice. No more protection for the guilty. There must be no pardoning or commuting the sentence of Maxwell, who sexually abused me, my minor sister, hurt so many girls and other young women, and personally threatened to kill me, has shown no remorse, and has demonstrated no basis on which to believe she would ever be truthful. As the Epstein case whistleblower, I have waited 3 decades for justice. It's a miracle I'm still fighting, especially considering what the stress of 3 decades of this case has done to my health and well-being. I will keep fighting for justice and transparency for a better, safer future for the next generation. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And obviously, I know we don't often get to hear from Ms. Farmer, and we're just very grateful that she chose to address, obviously, us and the country. I also want to thank her sister, Annie Farmer, who has been an incredible advocate, a survivor, of course, herself, and has really worked to share her sister's story and her own story whenever possible. We're going to hear some opening remarks also from Sky and Amanda Roberts. And so I would ask them to join us here at the podium. And I want to thank them also for their courage and for being here.
Thank you, Representative Garcia and all members here today. We deeply appreciate the opportunity to be here. Obviously wish Virginia was here to do this herself, but I will do my best to keep it together and to get through this. My name is Sky Roberts, and I am the younger brother of Virginia Roberts Giuffre. I'm here today because without Virginia's courage and her story, we would not be having this conversation about accountability. In the summer of 2000, just steps away from this courtroom at Mar-a-Lago, Virginia was recruited by convicted trafficker Ghislaine Maxwell. She was only 16 years old, a child who had just finished 10th grade when she began being trafficked. Before her passing, Virginia gave sworn testimony exposing this for what it truly was, a global sex trafficking operation enabled, protected, and funded by powerful people. For years, survivors have been asked the same question: who were the names? The truth is, many survivors stay silent because many of these individuals still hold power, wealth, and influence in our society. Point blank, period. That is dangerous. No survivor should have to risk their own safety just to be believed. But Virginia, she did it anyway. She stood up when others were afraid, told the truth under oath, and faced people she knew were powerful. Today, we lean on her courage once again, because she believed accountability should reach everyone involved, no matter their status or influence. If Virginia were here today, she would say these words herself. Since she cannot, I will say them for her as her little brother. And with that, I'd like to share Virginia's own words from her sworn deposition dated May 3rd, 2016. They trafficked me to many people. Okay, please name a person that Ghislaine Maxwell directed you to have sex with. Prince Andrew. Okay, who else? As a whole, they both trafficked me to many people. Okay, so can you please tell me when Ghislaine Maxwell asked you to have sex with another person? Glenn Dubin. Who else? Well, redacted is another one. Ghislaine Maxwell asked you to have sex with redacted? And Glenn Dubin and Steve Kaufman were, like I said, the first people I was sent to after my training. And where does Alan Dershowitz fit into this group of people? Same. I can't tell you piece by piece by piece who. I know Glenn Dubin was first. Okay. And I know Stephen Kaufman was one of the first that I was sent to. Alan Dershowitz could have been between Glenn and Stephen. This is only a small sample of the thousands of stories that still remain untold. But the question today is no longer whether names exist. The question is, what will Congress and the Department of Justice do about it? Even if only a handful of names are publicly known, will there finally be investigations and accountability? With that, I'd like to turn it over to my wife, Amanda Roberts.
First, I want to thank this committee and Representative Garcia and everyone here who continues to fight with us for accountability, but most importantly, standing with survivors. Virginia's story was harrowing, and as you heard my husband speak, she wasn't afraid to say the names. We are talking about millions of files, sworn testimony, depositions, emails, flight records, bank records, photographs, videos, and evidence collected over decades. Evidence that points to a network, not just to people who trafficked and abused over 1,200 victims, girls, children, women, and boys. Epstein and Maxwell did not act alone, and Palm Beach was the blueprint. It was the center for expansion. So when this Department of Justice says there is nothing to see here, survivors know exactly what that sounds like, a cover-up. Virginia wrote in Nobody's Girl, "Don't be fooled by those in Epstein's circle who said they didn't know what Epstein was doing." That sentence should guide this committee's work. Because I don't recall is not enough. When people like Les Wexner are asked about Epstein's finances and alleged connections to his network, the public deserves real answers and investigations. When Howard Lutnick has given changing accounts about his association with Epstein, that deserves scrutiny, resignations, and investigations. When former Prince Andrew denied knowing Virginia, despite evidence and testimony surrounding that encounter, that deserves scrutiny and investigation. And when Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche met with Ghislaine Maxwell, a convicted sex trafficker accused of perjury, and shortly after was moved to a minimum security prison, that demands answers and investigations. So today we ask for 4 things. First, Congress must hold this Department of Justice accountable, including contempt proceedings, as the record has shown that this DOJ has violated the law. Second, state investigations must continue and expand in New Mexico, New York, Florida, the Virgin Islands, and everywhere this network operated. Third, this committee must issue further subpoenas and required alleged co-conspirators, enablers, financiers, and witnesses to testify under oath. Fourth, follow the money. Financial records are not secondary. They may be the key to exposing the full network. Suspicious payments, shell entities, possible tax violations, money laundering, and transactions connected to trafficking and abuse must be investigated aggressively, because financial crimes can open the door and lead to real prosecutions. And finally, the Epstein and Maxwell investigations must be reopened, not partially, not quietly, but fully. Survivors and the public deserve the truth, and enablers must no longer hide behind wealth, power, or silence. Thank you.
Thank you both very much for those words. We are going to begin and hear some opening statements from our witnesses. So I want to just start by thanking Ms. Wild, who's going to be recognized now for her opening 5-minute statement. Ms. Wild.
Hello, my name's Courtney Wild. When I was 14 years old, I was abused by Jeffrey Epstein. He abused me until I was 17 years old. What happened to me was terrible, but what happened after that by our own government changed my life just as much. I came here today to ask for one simple thing, to make sure this never happens again. I filed a case under the Crime Victims' Rights Act because government secretly made a deal with Jeffrey Epstein. They signed a non-prosecution agreement. They made the deal behind closed doors. They never told me, and they never told any of us. Instead, they sent letters telling me to be patient, even though they knew the case was already over. For years, I believed there was an investigation happening. There wasn't. When I found out the truth, I went to my lawyer, Brad Edwards. He took my case in 2008, and he fought for me against the government for over a decade. We wanted to do the right thing for all victims. Together, we wanted answers to a simple question: how could this happen? We had to fight all the way to the 11th Circuit, which took years to get the emails between the government and Jeffrey's lawyers to help us understand what happened. When we finally got them, they showed something I will never forget. The government wasn't trying to negotiate with Epstein's lawyers. It looked like the government was trying to make him happy. They were trying to make sure that the punishment they were going to give him was okay with him. It seemed like they had forgotten that there were 40 of us kids who had been abused by him. I was so confused because where I come from, if you commit a crime, you go to jail. I have never heard the feds of letting you help them decide which crimes they're going to charge you with, or if you're cool with how long you're going to spend in jail. But I thought, what do I know? Maybe that's how it works for rich guys. That's how it did work for Jeffrey Epstein. Finally, after 10 years of fighting, in 2019, a federal judge finally ruled that my rights and that the rights of other victims were violated by the non-prosecution agreement. But there was nothing that could be done about it. There was no remedy. I just want to say it again. I'm sorry, I have to. The court found that the government violated the law and nothing happened. And that means the law, the Crime Victims' Rights Act, 18 U.S.C. 3771, does not matter. And if the law has no consequences, it doesn't protect anybody. I was lucky to have a lawyer willing to fight for me for almost a decade. A lot of victims won't find that, especially in this case where everybody made us feel like we were crazy. So I'm asking you to fix that. Please fix the Crime Victims' Rights Act so it could actually help victims in the future. I have my own ideas. and my lawyers have more ideas, but I really hope that if nothing comes of this, we can finally get the legislation right. There needs to be a clear definition of what it means to meaningfully confer with victims. I'm still not sure what that actually means, but I know it never happened for me. There must be real consequences and penalties in the statute that apply automatically when a court determines that a victim's rights have been violated. The answer after years and years of litigation cannot be nothing happens when you finally win and prove that your rights have been violated. If prosecutors choose to ignore victims, those victims' voices must be put on the record, memorialized, and preserved, especially when a deal is made behind closed doors. There needs to be attorneys' fees provision so victims can find lawyers who will stand up for them. If those changes had existed back then, maybe what had happened to me and so many others would have not happened. My case against the government for violating the rights of at least 40 of us Palm Beach kids was happening from 2008 to 2019. Do you know how many other girls Jeffrey abused in that time period? I bet the FBI knows. But the point is that Epstein continued to abuse other girls in New York, New Mexico, around the world, and even still here in Florida, well, after he was released in 2009, and everybody knew it. There were lawsuits. There were so many new articles. He was a registered sex offender, and still nothing was done by the government. Not until 2019 when he was finally arrested. None of those girls should have ever been abused. Jeffrey Epstein should have been in jail. If he had been in jail like any other man who did the same thing as him, he would have been, and there wouldn't have been a single victim after 2009. But he wasn't, and he did. He abused so many girls after 2009 at the same exact time that I was asking the government why he got the deal and why they violated my rights. That is the real injustice here. That is the real thing we need to prevent from ever happening again in this country. I was there for his bail hearing in 2019, and I spoke to the judge right in front of him about how dangerous he was. The bail was denied, and for the first time, I thought we might finally get justice. A month later, he was dead. Once again, the system failed us. Someone let him die in a secure prison, ensuring that he would never be held accountable for what he did to me as a kid. Since then, there have been prosecutions, there have been civil cases, there have been settlements, but none of that changes what was lost, and none of that fixes what was allowed to happen in the first place. We fought for years to get Jeffrey Epstein arrested. We fought to hold people accountable. We did not fight so that this could turn into something political or so that our rights would be violated once again. I lost years of my life fighting this, and so did many others. We did that so the next victim wouldn't have to. So don't let this work be in vain. Make the Crime Victims' Rights Act matter. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wild. Ms. Jones, you are now recognized for your opening statement.
Ranking member and members of Congress, my name is Jenna-Lisa Jones. I was 14 years old when I was abused by Jeffrey Epstein in Palm Beach. It has taken me many years to find my voice. For a long time, I stayed silent because I was afraid and because I did not understand why this happened to me. When I finally came forward, I made a commitment to use my voice responsibly. I'm here today to do exactly that. Last September, I went to Washington, D.C. along the other survivors with a simple request: transparency and accountability. We asked you to help us understand how Jeffrey Epstein was given a non-prosecution agreement, even though the government had evidence that he had sexually abused dozens of children, including me. We asked how he was allowed to leave jail in 2009 and continue harming young girls. We asked for answers that would hold our government accountable for its actions. We still do not have those answers. Instead, what we received caused harm all over again, including too many of our survivor sisters who had never come forward before and who never wanted their names or abuse to become public. The Department of Justice released documents that exposed our names, our social security numbers, and deeply personal information. Survivors' and identities were made public. Husbands learned about their wives' abuse for the first time. Children learned about the abuse of their mothers from reporters, from strangers on the internet, and in some cases, from other kids at school. Some survivors learned that friends had also been abused only because they saw their names in those documents. Others saw the most intimate details of their own trauma publicly exposed. Our privacy was violated. The government promised us over and over again that our information would be protected and properly redacted. Those promises were broken again. We came to you seeking answers for why our rights were violated in 2007. And in the process of asking for those answers, our rights were violated again. I want to believe that each of you in this room is listening because you truly care, not just about us, but about every child in this country who survived sexual abuse. If Congress and the Department of Justice truly want to do right by the survivors, the path forward is not complicated. Acknowledge the failures. When Jeffrey Epstein was set free in 2009, and again when our privacy was shattered earlier this year, take responsibility and provide meaningful remedies to the women who have been harmed over and over again. Please do not force us to relive this through more litigation. Pass a law requiring the Department of Justice to compensate victims for the harm that they had caused by releasing the names and information. That would show that this is truly about helping victims. Second, with respect to our ongoing investigations, please remember this. Jeffrey Epstein is dead. Ghislaine Maxwell is in prison. Do not pardon Maxwell. If there are other men who hurt women, hold them accountable, but please leave the survivors alone. If you subpoenaed someone to testify before your committees and she tells you she is a victim, listen to her. Believe her. Respect her trauma. Jeffrey tried to paint his victims as bad guys to avoid responsibility for himself. Please learn and understand that. Sharing our stories should be a choice, the choice I was able to make today. It should never be something survivors are forced to do. The girls who were groomed by Ghislaine Maxwell and abused by Jeffrey Epstein should not be treated like criminals. Please learn the stories of the women who have been harmed before you force them to testify in a room full of strangers about the worst moments of their lives. Jeffrey Epstein destroyed so many of our lives, and Ghislaine Maxwell helped him do it. Do not blame their survivors for the crimes of the abusers. That is not how the story should end. Find a way to bring closure to the story of Jeffrey Epstein, to allow survivors and this country to finally begin to move forward so that one day, and I pray soon, Jeffrey Epstein's name is no longer something we are forced to hear every single day. And my last point, I'm not here today only to talk about the past. I am here for the children who are sitting in the classroom today, children who may be vulnerable, confused, and unsure of what is happening to them. When I was a teenager, I did not have the language to understand what was happening to me. I did not know who to tell. I did not know where to go. Many of us didn't. We were young and we were manipulated. We were left without the tools or the support we needed. That is something Congress can change. Every middle school and high school student in this country should receive education on the signs of sexual abuse and exploitation, what it looks like, how to recognize it, and how to safely report it. Schools should have trained adults, accessible resources so that no child feels as lost or as alone as we did. I have worked with other survivors to start a nonprofit called the Survivors Inc. because not everyone who has been abused has access to strong legal representation, therapy, or support systems. I became a certified life coach. I believe in giving others the support I wish I had. Though the survivors, we were able to provide these services to people who have been abused so they can begin their healing journey too. I'm proud of that work, but individual efforts are not enough. Real change requires leadership at a national level. You have the power to make sure that happens to us does not happen again on this scale. I believe one of the most important places to begin is in our schools. Train teachers, educate students, give children a place to turn when they feel they have nowhere else to go. Together we can do better for the next generation.
Thank you so much, Jones. Ms. Bensky, you are now recognized for your opening statement. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Danny Bensky. I was abused by Jeffrey Epstein in 2004 and 2005. That was 8 years after Maria Farmer first reported Jeffrey to the FBI. Although discussing my abuse is far from easy, I live with diagnosed PTSD from that experience. My story is actually one of the safest stories to tell. The key abuser who caused me physical harm is dead. It's imperative to understand that the stories you are hearing today are a tiny fraction of the whole. I am one of more than 1,200 girls and women. I don't face the same level of threats of defamation lawsuits and serious risks to my safety as some of my survivor sisters do. While there are co-conspirators who do need to be held accountable for the parts that they played in the operation of my own abuse, I was trafficked only to Jeffrey, which really, unfortunately, is not the case for so many others. I was groomed prior to meeting Jeffrey. I grew up in the dance world where perfectionism, body image issues ran rampant in a world that was built on hierarchy and secrecy. I would have my body criticized, critiqued, and manipulated, not so different from what I initially experienced with Jeffrey. I was trafficked to Jeffrey. I had 2 recruiters. One was a late teen and the other was only 15 years old, just trying to escape her own abuse. Jeffrey weaponized my aspirations and dreams by speaking the language of dance and making false promises. My mom had been diagnosed with a brain tumor. I had seen the name Epstein listed on a donor wall and believed that his wealth and power had come from the medical profession. I brought him her scans, hoping to understand her diagnosis. Instead of helping her, he used my mother's brain scans over me, giving me an ultimatum: either recruit more girls or do more for him. I didn't end up recruiting anyone and instead just endured the abuse. In May of 2005, my mother had a successful operation at Mount Sinai to remove the tumor, and I finally extricated myself from Jeffrey's web. The Epstein case demonstrates that institutional systems have failed survivors time and time again. I was first subpoenaed in 2008 for an interview. I was just 20 years old, and without a victim's rights advocate or a lawyer, I didn't know that I was entitled to those protections. No one told me I was safe, and for many parts of my interview, it felt like an interrogation. Jeffrey had already threatened my friend, and he had told me that I would be charged with prostitution if I ever interacted with law enforcement. He made it clear that he held the cards. The passage of the Epstein Files Transparency Act was a moment in which survivors hoped and believed that we might see some reckoning. But the system yet again failed survivors. Before the first document dump by the DOJ, my lawyer teamed up with another law firm representing survivors. Together, they submitted 350 victims' names to the DOJ as names that needed to be redacted prior to the deadline on December 19th. In the first round of documents, I saw my name in 2 places. Then in the January dump, there were more, and the redactions were far, far worse. These files displayed my name, my phone number, my old address, where I worked at the time, where I was studying, and other identifying information. What's important to understand is that these documents weren't just somehow overlooked and not redacted at all. On one document, my nickname, Danny, redacted, while Danielle Hannah Bensky is left completely unredacted. I am just one of the hundreds of survivors exposed like this. A few weeks ago, a legal analyst reached out to share that yet again, my name appeared in a third batch of only 20 documents. After my lawyer continued to contact the DOJ on multiple occasions for protection, my name and information remained attached. These documents hold disturbing and yet incomplete accounts of my abuse, and they were viewable not only by the entire world, but my child, my students' parents, my friends, my employers, my colleagues, my family. I'm public. However, in my FBI 302, a Jane Doe who has never, ever wanted to be revealed was exposed. This outing of survivor names does real irrevocable damage. The passage of the Epstein Files Transparency Act was meant to be a moment when survivors could regain their power and finally obtain the truth. It was a time for our institutions created to protect the American people to, for once, stand on the side of survivors. As survivors, we have said time and time again, this is not political. This requires coming together and prioritizing coming together, not political showmanship. I'm always asked, what does accountability look like? Accountability means removing perpetrators from power, seeing arrests be made, and legislators pass laws like protecting victims' rights, like Virginia's law, which would remove the statute of limitations for victims' civil claims against their abusers. Our entrenched systemic failures have allowed powerful people like Jeffrey to thrive. When institutions prioritize protecting the powerful and their enablers over protecting victims, abuse becomes normalized. If we continue down this path, the question isn't whether abuse will happen again, but who will be the next Jeffrey Epstein. This moment is critical. It is time to reform our system to protect our survivors, not the perpetrators, and to ensure the truth can come to light. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Ms. Rosa, you are now recognized for your opening statement.
In 2008, I just turned 18 when I met MC Square Model Management owner named Jean-Luc Brunel. Coming from a financial and stable background, I was a perfect target for coercion. I was promised modeling career beyond my dreams. In less than 6 months, MC Squared obtained an O1 visa for me. A feat nearly impossible for a teenager with almost no experience. I did not have the documentation to earn that visa. By May of 2009, I was in New York City. I was isolated, controlled in a manner I've never experienced before. Within 3 months, the agency claimed I owed them over $10,000. I had no family, no friends, or no money. MC Square controlled every aspect of my life, where I went, how I dressed, and how I looked. They provided me enough of allowance to keep me afloat, but never enough to be independent. Less than a month after I arrived to the United States, my agency sent me to a home of a registered sex offender. I was introduced to his girlfriend under the disguise that she was a photographer who helped me build my portfolio. Now I know that Jeffrey Epstein was supposed to be in jail cell in June of 2008. I met him at his house right here in West Palm Beach. He was not in a jail. Jean-Luc Brunel brought me to West Palm Beach to have dinner with Epstein in July. Epstein used the names of powerful politicians to demonstrate his influence. He told me he's an investor of the very agency that promised me a career. He also spoke of his arrest that it was a game, bragging about girls visiting his cell and his friendships with authorities. Jeffrey offered me a position at the Florida Science Foundation to handle phone calls to help me with my financial troubles. One day, his masseuse called me into his room where I was molested for the first time by Jeffrey. For the following 3 years, I was subject to ongoing rape. Jeffrey Epstein was under house arrest for the molestation of underage girls at the exact time he was abusing me. Seeing that the fact that he could commit those acts made justice feel impossible to me, and it took my ability to seek for help. I was summoned to his residence right here in West Palm Beach. My agency relocated me to Miami to keep me closer, and only after he was released from the house arrest, I was allowed to go back to New York City, where my nightmares continued. Those years of abuse turned into a decade of fear that I still carry today. I eventually found the courage to reach out for help. I stepped forward along other survivors, hoping those who allowed this to happen will be held accountable. I kept my identity protected as Jane Doe. I woke up one day with my name mentioned over 500 times. While the rich and powerful remained protected by reduction, my name was exposed to the world. Now reporters from across the globe contact me. I cannot live without looking over my shoulder. I can only imagine the long-term impact this mistake will have on my life. I wanted to be a doctor when I was a kid. So I want to end this statement with a story. In 1800, the doctor named Ignaz Semmelweis discovered something life-saving. He realized that the doctors who were performing autopsies and then immediately delivering babies without washing their hand were carrying cadaverous particles, causing women die in agony. He had evidence, he had solution. He begged the medical establishment to wash their hands to save lives. But the doctors were offended. They found it easier to protect their own reputation and maintain the status quo than to admit they were the ones causing harms. They chose their pride over the life of women, and Dr. Semmelweis was ignored, ridiculed, and eventually cast out. I see the same patterns happening today with handling of these files. Releasing my name while redacting the name of other powerful is not a mistake, it's a choice. It's a choice to prioritize the comfort of an institution over the safety of the survivors. The evidence is right here, yet those in power rather us die socially, emotionally, and physically, than admit their own complicity. I am no longer a Jane Doe hiding in the files. I'm a woman. I'm a fighter and I'm a witness, and I'm begging you, please wash your hands.
Thank you, Ms. Rosa. Obviously, I think one of the true horrors of this investigation has been the way so many survivors continue to be traumatized. And I think this is one just really horrific example of how, even through the Transparency Act, so much horror and re-traumatization continues to happen. So thank you for the testimony. Mr. Kuvan, I'm going to recognize you for your opening statement.
Thank you. truly moved by her strength. Ranking member, members of Congress. My name is Spencer Kubin. I've represented numerous survivors of sexual exploitation and trafficking over the years, including the first victim to come forward in the Epstein investigation here in Palm Beach. I'm here today because what happened during the prosecution of Jeffrey Epstein was not simply a failure of judgment. It was a systemic failure of justice. In Palm Beach County, credible evidence of widespread sexual abuse involving minors was presented to state prosecutors, including my client. Law enforcement initially identified dozens of victims. The conduct was organized, repeated, and devastating. Yet instead of a prosecution that matched the scale of the harm, what followed was a secret agreement, as we know, that minimized the abuse and insulted the children that had been abused. Despite the efforts of some of the federal agents at the time, the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District decided to have these secret meetings with Epstein's attorneys. The U.S. Department of Justice, in conjunction with the Palm Beach County State Attorney's Office at the time, colluded in secret to quietly shelve this case with minimal state charges that branded a 15 and 16-year-old child victim as prostitutes. They gave a sweetheart deal to Jeffrey Epstein and 4 named as well as unnamed co-conspirators. The Southern District U.S. Attorney at the time, Alex Acosta, spearheaded what every attorney advocate saw as the worst non-prosecution agreement ever executed by a U.S. attorney. This sent a message. It told victims that even when the evidence is strong, accountability is negotiable if you are rich and powerful. This awful non-prosecution agreement completely shut down further federal charges for the events they were investigating here in Florida. As I mentioned, that tragic deal was negotiated and signed in secret. Not only was it kept secret from the world, it was kept secret from me. Calls were made repeatedly to the U.S. attorneys investigating this at the time by myself, an advocate for multiple victims at the time. And of course, it was kept secret from those victims. I was forced to file motions with the court to compel its ultimate disclosure, even after it had been executed. And finally, after obtaining court orders, they turned it over to us. A full year after it had been signed. The victims were not consulted. Their advocates like me were not consulted. Victims were never given an opportunity to be heard. This was not just a moral failure. We believed it was a violation of law under the Crime Victims' Rights Act. Originally passed in 2004, subsequently amended by Congress in 06, 08, and 15. Victims have had the right to confer with prosecutors and the right to be treated with fairness and respect. Yet those rights were ignored at the very moment that it mattered most, when decisions were being made that would determine whether justice would ever be pursued. The result was predictable. Survivors, as you've heard, were re-traumatized, not only by the abuse they endured, but by a system that excluded them from the process designed specifically to protect them. And the public was left questioning whether justice can be trusted when powerful interests are involved. This failure by the Department of Justice at the time was a subject of litigation brought, as you heard, by Ms. Wild. That case ultimately exposed a gap in the law, one that must be closed by you. Today, I want to offer that clear path forward. First, Congress should amend the Crime Victims' Rights Act to make it explicit that victims must be notified and given a meaningful opportunity to confer before any non-prosecution agreement or deferred prosecution agreement is finalized. Second, as you've heard, there must be enforceable remedies, not just suggestions. Victims should have standing to challenge agreements reached in violation of the Act, and courts must have the authority to review and, where appropriate, void those agreements. Third, transparency must be the rule, not the exception. Secret agreements that extinguish criminal liability, particularly in cases involving multiple victims, should not exist in our system of justice. And finally, there must be accountability. When prosecutors fail to uphold victims' rights, there must be consequences sufficient to ensure that those failures are not repeated. This is not about relitigating the past. It's about ensuring what happened here never happens again. The survivors in this case have showed extraordinary courage coming here today. They told the truth and they trusted the system, and the system failed them. Congress now has the opportunity, and I would suggest the responsibility, to fix it. Thank you. We look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. I'd like to go to Ms. Hirsch, please, who's now recognized for her opening statement.
Thank you so much, Ranking Member, members of Congress. I'm Lauren Hirsch, the CEO of World Without Exploitation, the largest anti-trafficking coalition in the country. We have nearly 200 member organizations across the country. Many of those organizations are survivor-led. It is an absolute honor to sit beside each one of you. You are the reason this moment of reckoning is happening. What we have witnessed in the handling of the Epstein case is not simply a bureaucratic misstep. It is a deeply horrific failure to protect the very people the system is meant to serve. Survivors have repeatedly been promised dignity, confidentiality, and care. And instead, we have seen a systemic breakdown in their protection at nearly every step of the way. We have watched those with power and privilege manipulate the system, shielding themselves from accountability, while survivors have suffered in silence. Every one of these failures sends a devastating message, not only to Epstein survivors, but to survivors everywhere, that accountability is optional for the powerful. Survivors have had enough, and frankly, the American public has had enough of this too. We are now in a moment of reckoning that requires a thorough examination of all of the things that have gone horribly wrong, but it also requires a serious course correction. Survivors have been repeatedly harmed, first by Epstein and his associates, and then by law enforcement who refused to bring adequate cases, who didn't notify victims when secret sweetheart deals were made, who allowed abuse to continue even after.
The survivors of Jeffrey Epstein deserve to be heard. You first did with care. We're essentially.
This can no longer be dismissed as human error. Something has gone horribly wrong inside the DOJ, and the American public deserves clear answers about how this failure has occurred. This requires a recorded deposition of Pam Bondi on May 29th, not a transcribed interview. Survivors also deserve meaningful legislative recourse, including a private right of action so that they can be compensated for the exposure of their private information to the public. Accountability cannot end with an examination of process failures or even legislative fixes. These files demand further examination. Assertions that there are no credible investigative leads are deeply concerning. From my perspective, both as the CEO of World We and a former prosecutor, that conclusion is not only premature, it is inconsistent with the available record. There is an abundance of potential investigative leads that warrant serious independent review. For 3 decades, countless men operated with complete impunity. Sex trafficking does not happen in a vacuum. It is driven by the demand for commercial sex, and it is enabled by systems and people who are willing to look the other way. That is exactly what we're looking at here. Likely the largest sex trafficking operation the United States has ever seen. The files are clear, and the files name names. When individuals and institutions surface repeatedly in the files, it's a pretty strong indicator that there's some there. When there are millions and millions of dollars flowing between an individual and Epstein, and there doesn't seem to be a business relationship, but instead allegations of sexual abuse, that's not noise to ignore. That is an investigative lead. And this is just one of many examples. And the examples are not just limited to individuals. Major hospitals took money from Epstein and provided questionable care. And that's putting it nicely. Hospital systems, academic institutions, modeling agencies, and the list goes on. They all require careful, independent examination of investigative leads. The burden should not fall on the survivors to name names or drive investigations. Survivors should be given safe, voluntary spaces to speak, but they should not be compelled. The responsibility lies with investigative bodies, prosecutors, the DOJ, on relevant authorities to do their jobs thoroughly, transparently, and with integrity. Survivors have already carried far too much of the burden. They should not have to carry the failures of our institutions as well. What is needed now is not defensiveness, but accountability. And finally, for survivors and for World Without Exploitation, this is not and has never been political. I'm sure that it will be twisted into us entering the political fray by being here today. But we have been absolutely clear. We will and have worked with anyone who is serious about getting to the truth. The era of silence and inaction must end here. Thank you.
Thank you. Obviously, just thank you to all of our witnesses for those opening statements. We're going to be moving on to questions and some comments from the members of this committee. I do want to uplift and recognize particularly the survivors and your courage again and how we got to this moment. I want to start just by, again, just commenting that we're here because of the horrific crimes of Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and numerous others, and the failure caused by our own government. And I want to, in my line of questioning, I just want to hone down on one thing, which I think is really important. Last July, the administration's FBI and DOJ released a 2-page document saying, and I quote, "We did not uncover evidence that could predicate an investigation against uncharged third parties." In other words, the current administration, through its DOJ, believed that this investigation was over, that no one else could be investigated for perhaps the worst sex trafficking ring in American history, that no other person could be held accountable, or there could be further convictions of the horrors made and against 1,200 women and girls. Now we here and some of our colleagues on the Republican side of the aisle have worked together to file motions, to file laws, and to push this investigation forward. And I want to be very clear. The DOJ, this administration, the president and the attorney general made it clear that this investigation, in their opinion, was a hoax, was a lie, and there was nothing else to do to move forward. The DOJ tried to close this case. Through our investigation, we have learned that many of the witnesses that we have been going through deposition, through transcribed interviews, were never questioned by law enforcement. And this is something that we learned only by forcing these interviews and by sitting asking these questions. How could Les Wexner have never been interviewed by our own government, who was the source of most of Jeffrey Epstein's wealth and was never questioned? How can some of the folks on this document the FBI had in their possession not ever have been questioned by our own government or law enforcement? How could Darren Indyke and Richard Kahn, who you can see in this chart and were essentially the brain trust of Jeffrey Epstein's organization, how could they never have been questioned? That is not a mistake. That is a cover-up. And what I think we want to make very clear is this is not just about the mistakes and the ongoing harm of the Trump administration. This has been harm posed by numerous administrations led by both Republicans and Democrats. And when folks come and ask, well, why wasn't the former administration Attorney General Garlick more engaged on this issue? I ask the same question. Why wasn't Merrick Garland more engaged and focused on prosecutions and more focused on getting out the truth? This is not just about partisan politics. This is a continued pattern of abuse and not seeking justice. But we're here now, at this moment in this Congress, with this administration, and this cover-up must end. I want to briefly ask the survivors, if you believe that this investigation should continue, if your government should continue this investigation. Ms. Spensky.
Yes.
Rosa.
Absolutely, yes.
Ms. Wild.
Yes.
Ms. Jones.
Yes.
Thank you. And we agree. It's unacceptable that folks have been not questioned, that there haven't been criminal prosecutions, and that our own former Attorney General continues to be engaged in this cover-up. They want to end this investigation. But what we are saying today is we need to come together with our bipartisan allies on the other side, and especially some Republican women who have stood and continue to push for truth and justice. We welcome their support in this investigation. At a hearing back in March, former Attorney General Bondi told one of my colleagues, quote, "I'm stunned that you want to continue talking about Epstein." That was her quote. Ms. Spensky, you were there. So was Sky Roberts on behalf of Virginia. Attorney General Bondi didn't spend 1 minute talking to you, but instead wanted to end the Epstein investigation. Today, we're here to tell the former Attorney General that we are demanding that she come in for her date with the subpoena, that she testify under oath, and that it's videotaped and released to the American public, and the survivors deserve nothing less. And I want to again ask the survivors. We know that approximately 2.5 million documents are still hidden. And we also understand that anything that's released in the future needs to be redacted with care and properly. Do you all support this Congress in the continued release of the files if redactions are done properly and with care? Ms. Spensky.
Of course, yeah.
Rosa.
Yes.
Ms. Wild.
Yes.
Ms. Jones.
Yes.
Thank you. I think it's important for the Attorney General, for Mr. Blanche, and for others to hear directly that the survivors don't think this is a hoax or that the investigation is over. Everyone in this room is committed to making the truth and justice a part of our legislative work. We have to pass laws and do the right thing. What we're facing right now is a systemic government, agencies, and administration that's trying to end this work, and we have to push back on it. We have sworn testimony. We've seen emails from the Epstein estate, from many others, even about the relationship and the friendship between the current president and Jeffrey Epstein. We continue to demand that the president force his DOJ to do the right thing by their survivors and to ensure that we get truth and justice. We're just a few miles away from Mar-a-Lago, where we know Ghislaine recruited and harmed and abused women, where Virginia herself was recruited. And we also know that the president, or his residence is just a few miles from here, is the one man in America that has the power to do the right thing and force the DOJ to release the files, protect the survivors, and demand and ensure that the American public get the truth. And that's why we're here today. And with that, I yield, and I want to turn it over to Representative Krishnamurthy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member. Thank you to all the witnesses. Thank you for your bravery, your conviction, and your determination. Today, I want to ask you first about Ghislaine Maxwell. Ms. Wild, in a written victim impact statement that was filed in court, you said that the abuse you suffered was, quote, deliberate and systematic, designed by Epstein and facilitated by his staff and associates, including Ghislaine Maxwell, correct?
I don't think that's I never had any relationship with Ghislaine Maxwell. Can you repeat that?
In a victim impact statement in Jane Doe 1 and Jane Doe 2 versus the United States.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I've never met Ghislaine Maxwell, but yes, that's what the other Jane Doe had.
Ms. Bensky, at Maxwell's trial, survivors testified that Maxwell participated in the sexual abuse of girls. Maxwell recruited victims for Epstein, including at schools. And that Maxwell once told a 14-year-old girl that she, quote, had a great body for Epstein and his friends. Isn't that what was testified to?
Yeah, my experience was not with Maxwell, but I am sure that is true. Yeah.
Ms. Jones, after Maxwell was found guilty of unconscionable acts, Politico reported that Maxwell's lawyer, this guy right here, said that there's a good chance and for good reason that Maxwell would get a pardon. You have publicly stated that, quote, clemency would be a slap in the face to all survivors, right? Yes. I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think everyone on this panel agrees probably. Maxwell hasn't shown any guilt, hasn't shown any remorse, hasn't shown any ounce of accountability for what she did. I've introduced a House resolution condemning clemency for Maxwell. I hope everyone here will join me because we have to do everything in our power to block a pardon for Ghislaine Maxwell. Ms. Hirsch, I want to turn to another topic, following the money. You're aware of Epstein-related financial records called suspicious activity reports, SARS reports, that have not been produced, correct?
Yeah.
And just to level set, a suspicious activity report is a report produced by a bank anytime a customer performs a questionable transaction. It turns out there were numerous such reports filed by banks with the Treasury Department for Jeffrey Epstein, including large cash withdrawals and even requests that Epstein made for the creation of bank accounts and credit cards for teenagers and people who had nothing to do with his family. Isn't that right?
It is.
The Senate Finance Committee has found Epstein made wire transfers that are detailed in these suspicious activity reports, SARS reports, to the tune of $1.5 billion with a B, and include the names of women and girls he may have trafficked, as well as the names of his potential clients. I believe that this is paramount to the investigation of this sex trafficking ring. Would you agree with that?
I do agree with that.
If we're serious about following the money, I believe that these SARS reports must be disclosed by the U.S. Treasury Department now, immediately today. Last topic, Ms. Hirsch. Can you give me this? These 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people, they must be disclosed today. What do you think about that?
Yes. I absolutely agree with you.
They may be among us today.
Wow.
Perpetrating a continuation of a sex trafficking ring. Now, Mr. Coven, DOJ has not released all of the raw interviews and transcripts from the more than 40 victims of the DOJ's that were investigated in the DOJ's 2008 investigation, right?
Correct.
And DOJ has not released all of the video footage collected at Epstein's properties, correct?
Absolutely. Not only that, I've actually walked through the home of Jeffrey Epstein after the incidents occurred and saw where the video cameras were located and no longer existed.
Wow.
Epstein tried to maintain his power over those he abused by taking away their chance at justice. We cannot let that happen. Donald Trump, I'm calling on you to listen to survivors. Release all of the documents. Unredact all these people. Prosecute the rest of these people and investigate the remaining. In addition, Ghislaine Maxwell should never, ever, ever receive clemency. That monster should not be given pardon, and ensure every enabler of Epstein faces consequences, no matter who they are or their political affiliation. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. Now we'll have Representative Stansbury.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. And I just want to start out by acknowledging our survivors who are here with us, and to those of you who spoke. People tell you all the time that you're brave, and you are, but I know that it comes at great cost to yourself, great cost to your families. But I want you to know, and part of why I asked the staff to hold up this picture is because you are literally changing the face of the planet by standing up and telling your stories. And even though the system is failing you again right now in Congress, you are changing the world by helping people who are survivors, who are victims, who have never had their stories told publicly, to know that they're not alone. So I want to say thank you for everything that you are doing. And I know that it's hard, but what you're doing is changing the planet right now. So thank you for holding that up. I got in early yesterday, and I went for a walk. I walked to downtown here in West Palm Beach, and then I walked across the bridge. I think, like millions of people across the country, I've seen, of course, the documentary that documents what happened here in West Palm Beach. And I wanted to walk across the bridge that survivors had told this story themselves of literally having been driven across. But I don't think that I truly understood the power, the wealth, the abuse that has happened in this community until I saw the mansions and the estates, the private clubs, and how inequality is literally written into the landscape here. And the reason why I wanted to start there is because there has been a lot said about the system of abuse that Epstein and Maxwell perpetrated. There has been a lot said about how grooming occurred, how recruitment happened, and how he psychologically threatened, abused, and used all these different tactics to abuse girls and women. But I want to make one thing clear here today, and I want to ask some questions about this, is we talk about the system failing. The system didn't fail. The system was designed to protect the wealthy. Mm-hmm. The system was rigged from the beginning when those mansions were built. The system was built on inequality. The system was built on exploiting people. It's written into the landscape here in West Palm Beach. It's written into the landscape in New Mexico, where Jeffrey Epstein went to Santa Fe with his rich friends and recruited girls that he exploited and then trafficked to other rich friends that he flew to New Mexico. This wasn't failure, this was a system. It was a system of exploitation, it was a system of abuse, and it was a system of power. And that's one of the things that I want to really dive into here with my short time today. Because the officials, the federal, the state, the local, the attorney generals didn't just fail to investigate these cases, they chose not to investigate them. They chose to take bribes and kickbacks and campaign donations. The police department here in West Palm Beach chose to take a donation from Jeffrey Epstein. The police and sheriffs and others in other cities and states chose to take donations. And right now, while this is not a partisan issue, this administration is choosing to not investigate the crimes that are in these files. This administration is choosing to release the names of survivors and not perpetrators. This administration is choosing to not investigate or indict a single man who committed rape of a child or woman that is in the files. And this administration is choosing to gaslight the American people while all over the world, foreign officials are arresting, investigating. A prince has been taken down, and here in the United States, our Department of Justice, which is sitting on millions of files, is refusing to act. That is not a failure, that is a choice. That is a system built on wealth, inequality, and exploitation of women, of girls, of children, and a system built to protect the powerful. That is a system. And it is a system that Jeffrey Epstein developed here in West Palm Beach. And then it is a system that he exported to places like the Virgin Islands, to New Mexico, and to all of the places that he operated. And so I want us to think about, as we're moving forward with this investigation, we can investigate all the hundreds or even thousands of micro decisions that were made by local police, by sheriffs, by state police, by the Department of Justice, by AGs who chose to turn a blind eye and not prosecute these crimes. But the only way we are actually going to get justice in this case is by changing the system itself. And that's exactly what you guys are doing. And it's powerful. You're literally taking on the entire world right now and a system of wealth and inequality. So I want to ask the survivors, because I feel like you get asked all the time to retell your stories, and I've read your stories. Anyone can go in the files and read your stories, but I want to hear from you what justice would look like in this case. So maybe starting here in the end.
It's always a sore subject, because I'm just like, at this point, honestly, I don't think justice will ever be served in this case. And that's just my experience of the past 20 years that I've dealt with it. If I were really optimistic, and it did, I think it would be, for one, the Crime Victims' Rights Act. We have to fix that law. Also, education in the school systems, maybe like with the sex ed, or just there has to be more education on what grooming is, on what sex trafficking is. It's not, I think a lot of people have a picture in their head that is just not reality. And for me, being that this happened in Palm Beach County, I think there needs to be like a building. And I think that the first 72 hours that a survivor tells their story and comes forward and says, okay, I'm ready to tell this. And it's such a crucial time. I think there needs to be something dedicated in Palm Beach County to all of our childhoods that were lost and taken. When we came forward and we told our stories, man, I was treated like a criminal by the federal government. And I just think, I guess justice would be change.
I don't know what justice looks like anymore. I'm just blown away that this is our government that is handling this. But justice would be, like Courtney said, accountability. These people that did wrong should be held accountable for what they did to us. Of course, we know that. But do I think that is going to truly happen? Probably not. Look at how this has gone on. But Education is so very important. Our kids are listening, they're watching this, they're hearing, and for the first time, for a lot of children, this is the first time they are even hearing about something like this. And so education is important. If we can't take these bad guys off the streets, let's teach our kids how to protect themselves in this. And so, but I hope the government gets it together. So, maybe get some justice.
I think justice starts with passing Virginia's law. I think that's a really great place to start because justice shouldn't have a time limit, right? I know at almost 40, like I'm about to turn 40 this year, and I'm just able to look at my abuse. I'm just able to sit and write it and read it. And so I think there are a lot of survivors who have never come forward. So that would be a start, passing Virginia's law, changing the statute of limitations. There's a culture shift that really needs to happen where the blame needs to be placed on the perpetrator and not on the victim, similar to Courtney's experience. My experience with law enforcement, I was so terrified and I did feel like I was being interrogated the entire time that I was there. I thought that I was going to go to jail that day. I was like, my life is over. It didn't really make me want to talk to anybody, but the FBI came back to my home in 2019. Anyway, I'll just say it was a very threatening feeling. So having an advocate in those spaces would also be really important. But yeah, just elevating survivor rights and making sure that we start with that baseline of Virginia's law. Yeah.
So I come from a different country and I have a job. And if you come to me and you ask me, what should I do, and ask a question about my job, I'll give you an answer. I appreciate you asking that question, but I don't know. That's your job. You guys have to figure out how to make justice, not me. And you can't give me justice. Like this, when I came to this country, I thought something is going to be different. And I am shocked that this is happening here in the United States. You keep on saying this is the worst case in the United States, but it's not. It's the worst case in the world. This never happened to me in other places, and I traveled as a model all over the world. This didn't happen to me there. It happened to me here. You need to figure it out, and I hope you do. And I hope this never happens again to anybody. Keep it in the history books. Don't stop fighting. Don't let it go away. I wish one day we all can sit there and never hear the name, but I also hope that we will forever, so this never happens again. Good luck.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I think that says it all. It's our job. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Representative Frost.
Thank you so much. I want to talk about something very specific. As we know, Jeffrey Epstein trafficked and abused women and girls, not just in Florida and New York, but internationally, across the globe. This case shines a light on the truth of sex trafficking, and it informs us as members of Congress of the changes and the reforms we need to pursue in many different areas that sometimes seem different but are all connected. I want to first thank you all for coming here today, especially the survivors, and sharing your stories. In many instances, we have seen that traffickers and sexual predators control employment opportunities for the people that they abuse. This happens everywhere, from working communities to the wealthiest and the most powerful pockets of society. Right here, this is from documents produced to the committee. It appears to show copies of passports in Epstein's possession belonging to young women. We believe many of these are survivors. Epstein's network is bigger than what many people understand. It's stretched across the entire globe. And we know that Epstein did not act alone. Him and his associates exploited financial and immigration systems, broken immigration systems, to traffic women and girls. Epstein helped women enroll in English language schools, facilitated their admission into American universities to help them get visas and help them secure jobs, all as a premise for getting the women into the United States. We questioned Epstein's lawyer about this and his accountant about the sham marriages which they helped arrange for immigration purposes. And many of these women, sadly, became survivors of Epstein's abuse. Thank you. Rosa, thank you so much for your very powerful testimony. Why did you come to the United States? You spoke a little bit about this.
I was a model. I came here thinking that my modeling career is going to be continued here. I traveled before United States and I was very successful. When I was able to escape the ring of Jeffrey Epstein, I was a successful model afterwards, but only after. During it, I couldn't.
So you came for opportunity?
Yes.
And we told you, right? We told the entire world, we've told the entire world, come to the United States for opportunity. This is a land of opportunity where you can be anyone, where you can do anything, right?
Yes. New York City was a top of a list for any model traveling and getting a contract.
Rosa, can you help us understand how Epstein, Brunel, and their associates used the promises of modeling jobs to recruit you and other women?
When you enter a modeling, you have a dream of ending up and walking Victoria's Secret show or on a cover of Vogue magazines. So when you're a teenager and somebody approaches you saying that they can be there to help you and be your word ally, I hate that word really, because that was used many, many times in trying to make me believe that they are my ally in order to get those jobs. So naturally, it comes across like these people care. And you believe them. Why? Because you're just a teenager. It doesn't look really scary to begin with. So they get your trust. And then they put you in a situation where financially you can't leave. The ticket back home costs $1,300 round trip. I was giving $100 a week in New York City to survive. And if any of you go to New York City today and try to live off $100, good luck.
Oh, yeah. Rosa, we also know that you're an immigrant, and we know that Epstein and his network also manipulated and threatened women using their visas or immigration status. Can you talk about your experience with this?
Every time I came to my agency or Epstein, which I didn't know why I came to him, I begged them to let me go back to other places I used to model before, on which they said, why? You're not going to do well there, so stay here. What do you need? I would say, job. And then they offered me job. They didn't give me money to purchase a ticket, and I didn't have a credit card. I didn't have my parents sending me money. I couldn't afford a ticket back. So they used my dreams against me, saying that it's just a time and everything's going to be okay. And if I trust them, all my dreams are going to come true.
We know that he weaponized people's immigration status, right? And the fact that they were immigrants against them, to manipulate them, to force them into his horrible crimes and the horrible things he did to them. There are so many changes that need to come from this investigation. And I think it's important that we also remember immigrant women are disproportionately impacted by sex trafficking in the United States. Epstein exploited this broken immigration system to do these crimes. And I think your story and your testimony shows that, and many of the other stories and testimonies that we've heard. This investigation shows us that we have to fix this system, not just demonize immigrants. And in a moment where the same people that are obstructing this investigation, the same people who are engaged in the cover-up of this investigation are also the one demonizing immigrants across this country, shows us the real truth, that if we spent a modicum of the money and energy that this government is using to go terrorize our communities and round up innocent people, to go after the billionaire pedophiles and sex traffickers and people who have exploited this broken immigration system, maybe we'd had some justice here. And so just thank you so much for being here and sharing your testimony. I yield back.
And now I'll recognize Ms. Lee from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Ranking Member. I want to start, like many, by just grounding us in the people who have too often been ignored. Survivors like Danny Bensky, who was just 17 when she was lured to work for Jeffrey Epstein with false promises that, and then threatened with her mother's illness. Rosa, who was trafficked across borders and abused for years. Courtney Wild, who not only survived abuse, but then had to lead a legal fight for recognition by a Department of Justice that was supposed to protect her. And Jenna Jones, who has sounded the alarm that a paltry release of DOJ files hints at a possible, probable cover-up. I just want to thank you all for being here, for continuing to show up, for your continued courage and your commitment to justice. We recognize that you are unfortunately four of very, very many more survivors. And I hope you know that your presence today means to survivors across this country, how important it is to them. For decades, survivors have worked in good faith with law enforcement to try to expose Epstein and his co-conspirators, only to have their interests and their needs ignored. From a bogus non-prosecution agreement way back in 2008, to the inexcusable release of personal identifying information from Pam Bondi and Todd Blanche's DOJ. The DOJ seems perfectly capable of concealing the names of these rich and these powerful folks in the files that have been released, but they did not give that same level of care to the actual survivors. And here in Florida, Alex Acosta spent more time cutting a deal with Kenneth Starr, Alan Dershowitz, and other well-connected lawyers working for Epstein and with Epstein than he did actually listening to survivors. This sweetheart deal enabled Epstein to continue abusing survivors while he was out on work release, as we've heard. The DOJ has failed to indict any other perpetrator of sex trafficking beyond Epstein and Maxwell, despite all the complaints and the reports that other individuals were implicated and involved, including from survivors themselves who have named these people. They seem to have no plans to do so. So Todd Blanche stating that the Epstein files, quote, should not be a part of anything going forward, unquote, is where we need to spend a little time. This is a glaring proof of a two-tier justice system of justice in this country. Mr. Cuban, this saga began with a failure at the state level when prosecutors declined to fully pursue justice against Jeffrey Epstein, right?
Correct.
You represented one of the first survivors in Florida. We saw a non-prosecution agreement that shielded Epstein and protected his associates. Can you explain why that agreement was so unusual and how harmful it was?
So first of all, as I said before, it was unusual because ordinarily the U.S. Attorney's Office would consult with counsel for the victims and talk about the potential charges that they're going to bring, and they never did that. They kept it secret. They would not answer phone calls. When I was able to get through to the U.S. Attorney at the time, who was Maria Villafana, she said, I can't talk to you. Second, it was so unusual because it not only gave immunity to Jeffrey Epstein, who was the target of their investigation, but it gave immunity to co-conspirators without prosecution of those co-conspirators, or even a hint of prosecution of 4 specifically named co-conspirators. Lastly, the most unusual part of that deal was that they added the phrase unnamed co-conspirators. I have never in 30 years doing this ever seen a non-prosecution agreement so broad as to say that they're giving immunity to unnamed individuals. It was a gift.
Ms. Wow, really quickly, can you tell us more about those emails between Epstein's lawyers and the prosecutors and what made them seem different from what you would think a typical plea negotiation would look like?
Yes, ma'am. When me and Brad Edwards were able to, we got the emails, it was literally friends. They were meeting at Starbucks, they were meeting off the record, wherever they wanted. These were friends literally negotiating how much time, what it would look like, what the charges were going to look like, what they were going to say during the grand jury. It was all scripted. It was all set up, cover up.
I just want to say really quickly, does any survivor feel, have you felt protected or seen or heard by the government?
No, ma'am.
Just no.
The redactions, none of my information had been redacted.
This is about a system that asks survivors to carry the burden of proof, the burden of patience, the burden of pain, while people with wealth and power are given time and protection and silence. Well, we're here today because of Jeffrey Epstein. Sexual abuse survivors across this country know all too well that he is not an anomaly, but he's a high-profile example of a system that too often works exactly as designed, to shield abusers and silence those that they harm. So to all the survivors, the fierce attorney advocates who are with us here today, I just want to thank you for coming forward despite the many frustrations, the threats, the dangers, and the setbacks that you've experienced. We have a responsibility to all survivors who are still waiting, to the ones who have never gotten justice, and to the ones watching right now, to say that this ends here, and we take that very seriously. I thank you all so much, and I yield back.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ms. Lee. And now I am going to recognize myself for 5 minutes. I've been smiling probably more than I am supposed to as I've sat here, because y'all bring me so much joy. And let me tell you why. The reason is this. It's because in spite or despite this incompetent government, y'all have not backed down. For some people, it is the very first time that they're seeing your faces, but you have been there when no cameras are rolling. You have been there for decades, and you are still showing up. The reality is that you are not a child in this moment, but you know that other children are potentially being subjected to something similar in this exact moment. And it is your courage that is contagious. We don't have that, unfortunately, in Congress. We got a bunch of cowards. But your courage is contagious. Think about it this way. One of the things that I really want to clarify, because I have had an opportunity to hear some of your stories and meet with some of you in person and behind closed doors, a lot of people who potentially are not on the right side of history right now, one of the common questions that they ask is, how is it that this could have happened to so many people, yet when you were going through your experience, you failed to see anybody else or know anything else, and you thought that you were all alone? And I know that that is something you have told me directly. So for the people that are watching, and they're hearing numbers like, man, thousands of girls, but at the same time, they're hearing, you know what, I never saw anything else. Whoever feels most comfortable, if you will, because for me, I don't think that I have that much confidence in the government overall doing what's right for the right reason, but it is the pressure from outside. It is you going out there and being courageous that has made the people rise up. That is why we were able to get some kind of movement. And so I want to build more allies for this movement right now. So if any of you would like to answer that question.
Thank you for that, first of all. But I think it starts with our young people knowing that they need to speak up. Because for me, I think I was pit against a friend of mine that went together to Jeffrey the first time, and he was very good at using the manipulation to hold us there. And so I felt like I couldn't tell anybody, and I didn't tell anybody. So I think it starts with the youngest. You know, if an experience feels off, to have a young person speak out and talk to even just a friend about that, and then say to that friend, hey, is this happening to you? Then the two of them can talk to an adult, and then we're already making change because we're already taking it out of the dark. I think the secrecy was the hardest part in my own abuse, and meeting all of the survivor sisters in September absolutely changed my whole life. And so I do think if you can find community and if you can find the people who boost you, it's really important, but it starts with our youngest survivors.
Thank you so much for that. And in fact, you brought up young survivors. You know, a quick question that I have for each of you is, do you believe that a child has the ability to consent to sex?
No.
Okay. Interestingly enough, most of the time our laws, whether they're state or federal, acknowledge that as well. But I have a transcript and I won't go through it, but it relates to the case that stemmed out of here where they were trying to make it seem as if a child victim was a criminal. That was the focus of their questioning. So it is so frustrating because literally when I was in the state house in Texas, this is one of the things that I actually worked on, was making sure we changed the actual language in the code, specifically as we talked about child victims. So that brings me to kind of where we are on the federal level. And I'm gonna wrap up because the time. I want to make sure we stay on time. My colleagues are nicer than I am. I'm gonna be real. They've used words like cover up, choice. For me, it's obstruction of justice. It's real clear. And that's just the lawyer in me. This is pure obstruction. Anyone else that would engage in this type of behavior would be charged with obstruction of justice. Yet somehow, because it's the Department of Justice, the ones that are supposed to enforce justice and law in this country, we're not calling it a thing, but that's what it is. And so it is my hope that we understand that while these survivors have taken the time to come out, and some of them were outed unlawfully and absolutely need to have some semblance of justice because of that illegal outing, because our law was very clear, to be clear about that. I need people to understand that we all have a role to play. People in this moment keep asking, what is it that I can do? Well, I'm gonna be partisan as well, because they're not being partisan. The Republicans could have shown up today too. They didn't. So let me be clear. I am going to be full on partisan. You have to vote. If you care about this, you have to vote, and you have to understand who is fighting for you. There are certain things that were always a basic kind of standard in this country for what was right. We protected the most vulnerable amongst us. We're not doing that nowadays. We made sure that we believed in quote unquote law and order, but we're not doing that nowadays. It is time to wake up. It is time for us all to do our part, because again, I'm gonna be partisan because only the Democrats decided to show up today. So with that, I will yield. And my next, okay, they're making me skip down. Okay. Well, we're going to head to Virginia. Rep. Subramaniam, it's your turn.
Thank you. I want to thank you all for being here today, and thank all the people in the audience here today. And I will just say that it's because of you that we had the Epstein Files Transparency Act passed, and the president himself had to sign it into law begrudgingly while in the background trying to figure out how to break it later on. And it's because of you that we were able to issue an August subpoena led by Representative Lee, and they still haven't complied with that subpoena, but it's because of you we got that far. And it's because of you that they won't even hold hearings, real hearings in the Oversight Committee on anything anymore, because they're afraid we'll subpoena more people about Epstein Files and Epstein Transparency Act. So just think about where you've gotten us. I know it's not enough. It may never be enough. Someone mentioned before, but I just want to thank you for getting us this far. And I know there are a lot of girls and women around the country and around the world who thank you as well. One of the things that has driven me crazy is that there's millions of files that have still not been released. And so this question really is for anyone. But one of the things that I remember hearing from many of the survivors last year was, you'd at least like your own files, your own witness statements. Has anyone received your own files? No. So no one has received their own files. And has the Trump administration talked to you about potentially giving you those files? I'm seeing everyone say no. And did they ever talk to you about which files they were withholding and why they would withhold them, or consult with you about that? I'm seeing everyone shake their heads as well in the audience, and all the witnesses we have today. And so I guess I would ask then, we're going to be talking to someone next week, Pam Bondi. And so do you have any suggestions on what we should ask her tomorrow? We can start on Ms. Wild, or anyone who'd like to answer that.
I think there's a lot to ask her, right? But do we believe anything that's just going to come out of her mouth?
Let's pretend yes.
Yeah. Okay. I definitely. Why? Who are we covering for? Like, you were willing to lose your job to cover up for these people. What do they have on you? Because I'd like to know. You're a woman, you're a mother, and you look at us, couldn't even look at the survivors. So what's your part in this?
Can I add to that? Process. What was the process? And we would ask the same of Todd Blanche. What was the process for moving Ghislaine Maxwell?
I could actually speak to three very specific things that you should ask her. Number one, there was hours of video surveillance taken by the lead investigator at the time outside of the home, watching people go in and out of the house that has yet to be released, and we know it exists from the probable cause affidavit. Secondly, back in October of 2003, there's record evidence that there were surveillance inside the home because cash was stolen from Mr. Epstein by one of his workers, and Sarah Kellen showed police that video from inside the home. That means surveillance cameras in fact existed in the home. Where is that video? And then lastly, Maxwell photographed everything. She loved taking photographs of people. That was her passion. They have not released even a fraction of the photographs that Maxwell took.
So I'm just going to add on to Danny's point about process and be a little more specific. So what transpired in advance of the files being released were a number of the lawyers who are in this room provided DOJ with lists of names. I think one lawyer provided about 300 names, and those names got released in the first batch. Many of those names got released in the first batch of files when they were dumped. The lawyer went back and said, these names need to be redacted. I'm just going to use Danny's as an example. I hope that's okay, Danny. So her lawyer went back and said, redact Danny Bensky's name.
There's a lot that this investigation needs to do just that. And so what I can say with certainty is that what the inspiration for this work looks like, and I'm looking at it. I'm looking at all of you. I'm looking at every single survivor, known and unknown, that continues to inspire us to do this work. And I thank you for being here. We do not take that lightly, that you've agreed to be here today and share your stories and being honest about why this matters, because as my colleague said, this administration has made it harder, not easier for you to be here, but you are our inspiration and we appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. Next up is Representative Min.
Thank you to the survivors for appearing here today. Ms. Wild, Ms. Jones, Ms. Bensky, Rosa, Mr. Roberts, Ms. Roberts, your testimonies are powerful and extremely heart-wrenching. And we're sitting right now just 2.8 miles from the Epstein estate where so much of this took place, 4 miles from Mar-a-Lago where Jeffrey Epstein spent so much of his time. And I don't think it's lost on any of us up here how much courage you all are showing in being here today in sharing your stories, because as we begin to unravel the threads of the Epstein files, we're seeing just how broad and deep this conspiracy goes. And a number of you have talked about the threats you face, and that must be incredibly frightening. Many of the world's richest and most powerful men are implicated, and they have directly perpetrated a decades-long cover-up. Even after we were able to pass the Epstein Files Transparency Act, over the maneuvering and objections, I'd add, of President Trump, then Attorney General Pam Bondi, and Speaker Mike Johnson, the rich and powerful were still able to pervert justice, with the DOJ refusing to turn over 50% of the documents in their possession, redacting the names of the perpetrators while releasing personal information about many of you, re-victimizing the survivors. And that's outrageous. And we for damn sure need to ask Pam Bondi what the hell happened here and why she chose to re-victimize survivors when she appears before us next week. Mr. Hirsch, I want to start with Ms. Hirsch, I want to start with you real quickly. Are you aware of any instance where the DOJ contacted survivors before they released personal identifying information about the survivors last year?
The DOJ did not contact survivors directly, but we at World Without Exploitation did reach out to DOJ.
But
and
they did not reach out.
They did return a phone call, but when we asked them to speak with survivors, that never happened.
And that's outrageous because the DOJ is supposed to represent justice for people who are victims of crime, not re-victimizing them, not protecting the perpetrators of crime. And what's at stake today for you all and the hundreds of other women who were trafficked and abused by Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and their associates is justice for you, but also the idea that there's one rule of law for everybody. That we don't have one set of rules for the rich and powerful, the Epstein elites, and another that applies to the rest of us. As I've said before, I spent my career fighting for the rule of law. This is very important to me. I also started my career at the Securities and Exchange Commission, prosecuting corporate fraud, then taught banking law at UC Irvine. And I also know that following the money is the first rule of tracking down any kind of major criminal conspiracy. And as I just want to reiterate the points that were made earlier by Rep. Krishnamurthy, by you, Ms. Roberts, that we need to follow the money, that Epstein survivors have sued and won settlements from a number of large financial institutions, including Bank of America, JP Morgan, and Deutsche Bank, hundreds of millions of dollars. We need to get the SARS reports from Treasury. We need the SEC, Treasury, and the banking regulators to investigate and potentially prosecute anyone or any institution that was complicit in covering up or helping facilitate the Epstein trafficking ring. Now, Mr. Kuvan, you've stated previously that Epstein would never have been able to get away with this horrendous crimes without the complicity of banks, the big banks. And back in 2023, you stated, I've always said that he would never be able to molest these young girls without the banks and the money behind it. Could you briefly elaborate on what you meant when you said that?
Correct. So we found during our original litigation back at the inception that he was pulling out large amounts of cash and transferring funds back and forth, and large amounts of cash were coming out of the banks. There were never any questions that were being asked of him at the time. And in fact, as I alluded to before, even back in 2003, he had envelopes filled with cash that he even reported to police that had been stolen from his home. And the banks appeared to be working with him, not questioning him, because of all of the money he was moving through those institutions.
It is a damn shame that the Department of Justice and the FBI have never followed this thread, even though it's something that is very, very important. I will just add that House Oversight Democrats have worked with Chairman Comer to issue subpoenas for Deutsche Bank and JP Morgan, but we're seeking subpoenas for an additional 21 banks. I think this is going to be really, really important. Another important piece of evidence that has not been followed up on is the camera evidence, the computer files, as the lead attorney at the time, Maria Villafuena, had referred to. Now, you had mentioned, Mr. Kuvan, that you saw a number of cameras in the estate that would potentially have a lot of damning footage. Can you describe what cameras you saw and how many, where they were located in the estate?
Right. So after we originally filed the first case here in Palm Beach for one of the victims, I was granted an opportunity by the court to go on property at Epstein's home and do a site inspection. There were spots within the home, both in the bedrooms and the massage area and other areas of the home, where you could see mounting brackets where cameras used to be. And then there were CPU or computer units that had been taken away. And then I was able to verify back in 2003, as I said, that Sarah Kellen had actually shown internal footage to the police department back then of someone that had allegedly taken money. So there was verifiable evidence that cameras were in fact in the home. Lastly, I represented a client in Manhattan who, when she was brought to the home in Manhattan, saw the entire network of cameras that was being utilized in the Manhattan mansion. None of that video has been released today.
And in fact, lead attorney, I'll just close with this, Maria Villafuena, had said that that was a smoking gun, this evidence. They knew exactly where it was, and Alex Acosta, who was then the U.S. attorney, refused to investigate this or actually seek to have this turned over. I want to thank you all again. Thank you for your courage in being here today. That I yield back.
Thank you, Congressman. Next is Representative Randall.
Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member, and thank you to each of you for being here today. I especially want to thank those of you who shared your stories about surviving unimaginable abuse. We thank you for your immense bravery, which we do over and over again, but also for your willingness to relive your trauma in pursuit of justice. I know you've waited far too long and are still waiting. You are seen and heard by every member of Congress in this room, and we will make sure that your stories are not ignored. Former Attorney General Bondi literally kept her back turned away from a room full of survivors. We've seen the photo. We are here to do the opposite. We are here to walk alongside you and to shine a light on the stories that you have shared over and over. We'll keep fighting for truth, for transparency, and an end to this shameless DOJ cover-up of all the information relating to the heinous crimes of this Epstein case. DOJ's document productions to date have released very little new information about Epstein's co-conspirators. In fact, we know that there are more than 2.5 million documents still hidden. But unfortunately, as we have heard today, recent releases have exposed private and personal identifying information of survivors. DOJ has created serious risk to safety for survivors and published names and photographs, some of them very explicit. Survivors have also shared with the committee that in multiple instances, as we heard again today, loved ones didn't know that you had been abused by Epstein until that information was released publicly. Every oversight Democrat sent Pam Bondi a letter back in February to express alarm at DOJ for publishing survivor names and photographs thousands of times, while taking special care to redact information that could be crucial for bringing justice and holding perpetrators of abuse accountable. The sheer amount of personal identifiable information released after survivors got assurances from DOJ that they would be protected raises the question of whether this is just incompetence or, far more likely, deliberate witness intimidation. Ms. Bensky, you have spoken about this, about the harm of DOJ's sloppy Epstein file release that has caused you and other survivors. You spoke about your own name being released despite repeated requests to redact it. Will you share again for us, for the record, what that experience meant to you and other survivors to have your information be exposed?
Yeah, I mean, I am public. That's a choice that I made, but never in my life did I expect for anybody to read intimate details of abuse. To me, it's always been about protecting others. And, you know, unfortunately, I have friends in this story. And to see somebody's name out there who has worked so hard to move past this in life is something, it sends a shockwave through your body. It hits you like reading your own name in the file first. Just like I went into the files thinking I would have to look pretty hard to find things, type my last name in and everything came up, right? Yeah. And it's like, there's like a hot flash moment, right? It hits you sort of like a bullet to the chest where you're like, oh my God, it's that feeling of like that PTSD is real, right? So the PTSD of the trauma that I endured definitely came back. And then you're reading on and then you see more and you see survivors being outed, a survivor that I had said, you know, don't ever worry, you've always been a Jane Doe. So, and to feel the impact of that is something that I will carry forever.
I'm sorry. I feel like you deserve an apology from your government. And, you know, as Democratic members of Congress, we are here to continue to work with you. But I also know that we absolutely have to fight for better. We have to fight to pass Virginia's law. And I know Congresswoman Frankel wanted us to share that she's also been working on the Courtney Wild Reinforcing Crime Victims' Rights Act to ensure that those rights that you are owed are actually upheld, that we work with survivors to inform you about any prosecutorial agreements, to ensure that folks know what rights you are awarded and deserved. And we will continue to investigate and to fight for all of you, but also for every survivor and every young person who is being victimized around the world. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Representative Ansari.
Thank you, Ranking Member. President Trump, former Attorney General Pam Bondi, and Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche promised truth and transparency regarding the Epstein files. They have instead led the most egregious cover-up in American history. Despite their public assurances, Pam Bondi released Epstein files at an excruciatingly slow pace. And when she did, as we heard in powerful testimony today, protected the names of rich and powerful men who committed the crimes while revealing the identities of survivors. In March of 2026, the DOJ admitted that it withheld almost 48,000 files from public release, including allegations against President Trump. The Trump-Epstein administration continues to try to cover it up to this day. President Trump has said most recently that we should stop wasting time and energy on the Epstein files. He's called the fight for the release of the files and transparency, and I quote, a hoax. Abuse and trafficking of thousands of minors is not a hoax. Abuse and sexual exploitation of women is not a hoax. Survivors deserve the truth, and the American public deserves the truth. Ms. Jones, you have said that you, and I quote, put your hope in President Donald Trump and that you believe that he would do right by the survivors. Now, do you believe that he has broken his promise?
He's broken many promises.
Thank you. I want to remind everyone that former Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene alleges that during a phone call, President Trump told her that if he was to release the Epstein files, and I quote, my friends are going to get hurt. And now the Trump Department of Justice that is responsible for overseeing the release of the Epstein files claims that there is nothing more to investigate in the Epstein case. Todd Blanche met with Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's accomplice, before moving her to a cushy, minimal security prison. It is so ridiculous and insulting. So far, only Epstein and Maxwell have been prosecuted for sex trafficking, and there has never been a full accounting of Epstein's financial crimes or additional prosecutions of suspected co-conspirators. Last month, Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche said, and I quote, from the information that we have within the Epstein files, we do not have a case against anybody. Ms. Jones, based on your experience or based on what you have seen in the files, do you believe the statement to be true?
Absolutely not.
Ms. Bensky, based on your own experiences or what you have seen in the files, do you believe the statement to be true?
No.
Ms. Wild, I'd like to ask you the same question.
No.
And Rosa, lastly, I'd like to ask you the same.
No.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I'd like to now have Representative Walkinshaw.
Thank you, Ranking Member, and thank you all for being here. Walking into this room and telling your stories again takes tremendous courage. And I've heard a lot of the stories from survivors, and like everybody, I'm struck by the courage, the commitment to justice for Epstein, Maxwell, and everyone involved in these crimes, but I'm most struck by your commitment to protecting every child and every potential victim of sexual abuse or assault. Epstein, Maxwell, and their co-conspirators shattered lives. They targeted vulnerable women and girls, objectifying and attempting to silence them. They were protected by their wealth, their power, their privilege. We can see it here in Palm Beach. And as we've heard today, their ability to commit these crimes reflects a systemic and intentional failure by the very institutions meant to protect you. Our government lets you down when you deserve protection and justice for the crimes that were committed against you. And we're here today to try to do our part to correct some of these failures. And we're not going to stop until the truth comes out. The extent of the crimes, the involvement of all of the co-conspirators is revealed. I want to focus on two patterns that have emerged today. First, Epstein and Maxwell weaponizing immigration status and travel documents against survivors, confiscating passports, holding visas hostage to trap women and girls in their orbit. And then when survivors like yourselves were brave enough to speak up, our justice system ignoring you, reinforcing the sense that there was nowhere safe for you to turn. Rosa, Ms. Wild, thank you for being here today. I want to ask you both just a couple questions related to these patterns. Rosa, can you tell us again how Epstein used your visa status as leverage to keep you under his control?
O1 visa is a visa for an individual with extraordinary abilities, and it takes a lot of documents to obtain that visa. I have helped one individual to obtain similar visa, and I learned the amount of documents needed to be gathered. Looking back at my case now, I did not have documents to obtain that visa. I am 100% sure of that. My agency being able to obtain that visa for me in such a short time, which was less than 6 months, it's a miracle. You try to do that right now, you won't be able to. I want to know how. And it's impossible. So I knew that my visa was linked to him, and if he is unpleased, I would be sent back.
And are you aware of Epstein using similar tactics against other women or girls?
I have personally met a foreigner girl at his mansion in West Palm Beach, and I have not seen a foreigner come forward to tell the story. And I hope my case will bring more people out in front, because there are many other people who speak broken English or don't speak English at all who can tell their stories.
Thank you. Ms. Wild, you were 14 as you testified when you first encountered Mr. Epstein. Is this you?
Yes.
A child?
Yes.
I just want to go back to the DOJ investigation and the sweetheart deal for Epstein and ask you, were you told by the Department of Justice that your case was still being investigated even after Alex Acosta signed off on Epstein's plea deal?
Yes, they sent me a paper in the mail. My attorneys have it. That saying it was going to be a lengthy process, and that they were doing everything that they could to put him away. But at that time, when the letter was dated, it had already been signed, the non-prosecution agreement.
You learned later that they had already signed the deal.
Yes.
So that letter they sent you was a lie. They lied to you.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you both. I yield back.
Thank you, Congressman. Next up is Representative Presley.
Thank you to Congresswoman Lois Frankel. Thank you to Ranking Member Garcia, to Congresswoman Summer Lee. Your efforts made today possible. And of course, thanks to our courageous survivors. I've been on this committee since I was a freshman, and Elijah Cummings, the great Elijah Cummings, our chair at the time, would often remind us that the role of the Committee on Oversight, our mandate, is to be an efficient and effective pursuit of the truth. Now, that pursuit is what brings House Democrats here today, because instead of Epstein's victims being met with efficiency, they've been met with obstruction and delays by law enforcement and by the Department of Justice. Instead of Epstein's victims being met with effectiveness, they've been met with systemic cover-up. And I would add cowardice of those who were intimidated by the power and the privilege of Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and their co-conspirators. So today we are here to shine a light, because sunlight is the best disinfectant. We are here to shine a light on the corruption, on the failures of this investigation. But most of all, we are here to center the survivors, to center the courageous. Survivors who are grown women before you, but who were children. Children whose innocence was corrupted, whose bodies were violated, whose dreams were destroyed, whose lives were irrevocably changed. Maria, Courtney, Jenalisa, Danny, Rosa, and Sky and Amanda here for Virginia. We thank you. Congress enacted the Crime Victims' Rights Act in 2004 to mandate specific obligations for the Department of Justice to ensure that survivors are protected, informed, and able to heal. Now, Mr. Kubin, you've spent decades representing survivors and fighting for transparency around the federal government's handling of their cases. Can you speak to how the federal government violated after their bodies were violated, after their dreams, their dignity, their lives were violated? How were their rights violated?
It was our understanding after the release of documents and the bravery of Ms. Wild here at the end in her case that was brought and the final disclosure of all those documents, it showed that the federal government and the state attorney's office colluded together to not bring an indictment because they knew that if they did, then the Crime Victims' Rights Act would then be triggered and they would have to inform the victims of what they were doing. So what we learned was they intentionally kept it out of the hands of victims so that the victims couldn't object or have any say in the process by secretly doing this deal that they did. And the federal judge, very brave federal judge Mara, found that there was a violation of the act here in the Southern District. And unfortunately, because of the way the law was written, there was absolutely no way to get them any justice or any remedy as a result.
That's right. So they weren't notified, they were not consulted, they were not given the opportunity to participate in proceedings that directly affected their lives and their safety. These rights are supposed to be guaranteed by the Crime Victims' Rights Act. Now, would any survivors like to speak to any examples to share about how the federal government ignored or neglected your case? I see the clock is ticking here. Would anyone else like to speak to that? How about this? Let me just say this as a survivor myself. I know that this is not only about your safety that you were robbed of, your innocence and your dreams. Survivors are also forced to carry the financial burden of abuse. Lost wages, housing instability, medical expenses, legal fees, security costs, trauma that impacts your daily life. Could any of you speak to that?
We have put ourselves on the front line and spoke out and put our face to the public when we should have never had to. And that comes with a huge toll. Now, every job that we apply for, they Google us. They know our most personal information of things that happened to us as children. That is forever, forever going to follow us. We don't get that back. We don't get that luxury. So that is just the one of the most important things that comes with the weight of this, all because the government couldn't do their job.
May I heard this before from the survivors. I'm a really cool person if you meet me outside of here. I have a life stories, but this release of documents made me something else. And I can't do daily task without certain help. And I have a support system and I'm grateful for it. But if I didn't, I don't think I would be here today alive. So it's really hard. I want to tell the world, like, it's hard to be here today. I'm very uncomfortable. I'm trying to look like I'm okay, but I'm not okay.
Yes, would anyone else like to speak to the financial burden of abuse, lost wages, housing instability, medical expenses, legal fees, security costs?
So I was gonna, when I was younger, when I met Jeffrey, I experienced a lot of homelessness. So I think I misunderstood your question, but
Oh, no, say whatever you would like.
Yes, ma'am. I was just gonna say that, just like you were walking over the bridge, a 14-year-old going to Palm Beach, it was like, as soon as you go over that bridge, you just feel the money and power. And it's just such a contrast. If you go down Okeechobee to Okeechobee and the Turnpike, there's a road called Drexel, and it's a mobile home street, there's a lot of, that's where I was from. So to go from here to there is just, it's so confusing. I was homeless. My parents had addiction problems. He prayed, he knew what he was doing. It was all very calculated, and then later on, the fact that he used those things against me. We had the feds pulling up our MySpaces, treating us like criminals because we were at a party at 16 and 17 drinking, rather than going out. So for me, it's so sad that he knew who he preyed on. He preyed on young, especially in Palm Beach County. He preyed on us kids who came from troubled backgrounds and everything else, and they portrayed us as these underage prostitutes. Which is that a real charge? Is it? Like, what was the statute number? I'm on his charge that he took. Spencer should, right? Is that a real charge?
It was bizarre to us even at the time, but it made absolutely no sense. And the statutory guidance was very questionable given that they were minors. But speaking to Representative's question specifically and representing survivors over the last 30 years now, it affects not just the survivor. It affects their family. It affects the way they raise their own children if they have daughters. It affects their mental stability and ability to maintain employment. Try telling a survivor they've got to pay a lawyer for 20 years straight if they want to get justice. It's impossible, especially with a law that doesn't provide any remedy. So they've got to seek out victims advocates that are willing to do it for free. And there aren't many of those, especially none that want to do it for 20 plus years to fight. So the financial ramifications of being a victim, especially of somebody with unlimited resources, is dramatic.
Can I add to that? I think also to continue this fight, like we're all here right now. And this isn't the only thing I'm sure we're all doing this week to talk about getting the messaging out. Advocacy is expensive. Therapy and healing is expensive, and there's no time to work because honestly, we got to change it for our kids because I don't want to raise my kid in a world like this right now. So.
Yeah, I'll just close out with one point to Courtney to your question about these prostitution charges. We need to eliminate the prostitution charges from the books altogether. We absolutely should be holding sex buyers accountable for the harm they cause, but people in prostitution should not be criminalized for being in prostitution because the vast majority of them are not there by choice. They're there because of lack of circumstances, poverty, other vulnerabilities. And what we see so often is that traffickers deliberately use that notion that the women and girls will be arrested for prostitution as a tactic. It is the number one tactic in order to make sure that survivors, victims are too terrified and too traumatized to talk. So we've got a lot of work to do.
Yeah. And I just want to, again, I thank you all and thank you for being prescriptive with a number of the legislative responses to address these systemic harms. I'll just say that there is no amount of compensation that can ever fully account for what was stolen. But every single survivor certainly deserves much more than sympathy. And that is the work that I'm committed to doing alongside of you legislatively. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I'd like to turn it over now to Representative Frankel.
Thank you. Thank you again for being here. Let me just start with Courtney. You and I met many, many years ago. And just to let you know, I took for heart what you said. And myself and colleagues, Democratic Women's Caucus, we have filed a bill many years in a row named after you to make sure we can get these rights that you talked about. And the Courtney Wild bill would assert that the victims of federal crimes are entitled to all the rights guaranteed under the original Crime Victim Rights Act, regardless of if the charges are filed in court. And then it lists out a whole set of criteria. So I want to thank you for your bravery. we're still trying to get that bill passed. It's a little difficult under the circumstances, but we're going to keep trying. And thank you so much for your persistence. Yes. Now, I want to tell everybody, I don't think I was able to tell you exactly why it took so long to have this hearing in Palm Beach County, because I think many of us always believe there are 3 witnesses who have been missing, who must be asked the question, why did Jeffrey Epstein get the deal that he got, and why were the survivors so mistreated in the grand jury room? And those people are Barry Krischer, who was the state attorney, Lana Levick, I don't know if I'm saying that name right, she was one of the prosecutors in that grand jury, and Mary Ann Dugan, who was one of the prosecutors. I've requested for many years that those people be subpoenaed. We almost had an opportunity. In 2019, Karen Maloney was the chair of our oversight committee when Democrats were in charge. We actually scheduled to have this hearing here. And what happened was the Justice Department had engaged the Maxwell prosecution, and they said they would not allow survivors to testify. So that's why that was correct, actually. So that's what happened. And then political circumstances changed. But we need to get to the bottom of this. And my next question really was for you, Mr. Kuvan. Thank you so much for all you've done for the justice system. Can you give us any insight, opinion, why these charges were so watered down? Was it power? Were the attorneys, was the state attorney here? Let's start with Barry Krischer, because he could have stopped it right away, right? Could have stopped it right away. Was he overpowered? Was he sweet-talked? What happened?
I think all of the above. Unfortunately, the system is political here, and he was an elected representative. And after my client went forward to police and the investigation began, we saw a full court press, meaning that Epstein hired his lawyer from Miami, Roy Black. He hired Alan Dershowitz. He hired Mr. Lefkowitz from New York, and they all swarmed into Palm Beach County. And they met with Barry Krischer with all kinds of information that was just an attempt to smear victims. They called them liars. They called them young, prostitutes. As Courtney stated, they were pulling up MySpace pages of these girls. And then they were talking about the parade of horribles that could happen to Mr. Krischer. And they were doing this in the history, unfortunately, of this county. Many may forget that there was a failed prosecution of a rape here in Palm Beach County from one of the Kennedys.
Yes.
And there was a huge publicity problem associated with that on a political basis. And I know that Barry Krischer was aware of that. And I think he saw his career going up in flames if he were to prosecute these. So I think he was looking for an out. And as a result, I think that's why he tanked the grand jury investigation.
Well, what a bad excuse. I think perhaps his career should have gone up in flames, really. I mean, look, taking the personalities out of this, I would suggest not only did the lawyers put pressure on him, but I would assume that he got many phone calls. Is that correct? You want to add to that?
We have no doubt that a number of phone calls were made politically. In fact, Chief Ryder at the time, who I spoke with and in sworn deposition testimony, stated that he, in fact, was so concerned that he asked Mr. Acosta directly, is he a protected informant?
So you mentioned Chief Ryder, because I think it's always good to identify the good guys. And Chief Ryder, who originally brought this case, was appalled with what Krischer was doing here. And ironically, he ended up taking the case to the U.S. attorney, who didn't do much better. What happened there? Was it the same type of pressure?
Yeah, it was even higher pressure at that point, because then Ken Starr got involved as well on Epstein's team, and we all know that name from history. And there were huge amounts of political pressure that were being exerted on in the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District at that time. But you're absolutely right, Chief Ryder fought the good fight. And he was so angry at Barry Krischer that he wrote a scathing letter that's in the record now to him, just astounded at the failure of his office to prosecute these claims. And they were looking at the U.S. Attorney's Office to save them, to save the case. And unfortunately, they were just appalled at what they did as well.
And one more comment, which is to really salute the power of the press, because it was a Miami Herald article in November 2018 called Perversion of Justice that finally really started to bring a lot of this to light. And then it was the Palm Beach Post going to court to get the grand jury proceedings of Palm Beach County open, and that was in a couple of years later. So we thank them, and I'm going to yield back in a minute just to say again, thank you so much to the survivors, to our witnesses. So for you are an inspiration of courage and perseverance, and give us really the intuition to continue for this fight. And again, let's make sure that we subpoena and have all the relevant witnesses testify, and we find out who else should be accountable, because Jeffrey Epstein did not act alone. And with that, thank you so much for holding this hearing. I yield back.
Thank you. Thank you, Representative. And I want to, again, just as I close this out, I want to thank first and foremost Representative Frankel for hosting us today. This would not have been possible without her leadership, her team, her insistence on why Palm Beach County is so important to this broader investigation. And of course, I want to thank Mayor James and his team for their support in putting this hearing together. Most importantly, I want to thank the survivors that are here and our witnesses. Your testimony on the record is so important, and I know so many of you have had to continue to speak out, but having your stories and your answers in the record is really important to our investigation. I want to thank you for your courage. I also just want for the public to understand that for those of us on the committee, we are focused on truth, accountability, and justice. Clearly, Palm Beach, the U.S. Attorney's Office, so many of the prosecutors that were involved in this case, law enforcement officials, these are all individuals that we have a lot of questions for. For us to really move this investigation forward, we need to understand why the prosecutors that went forward to the U.S. Attorney, to other courts, and demanded and asked for prosecutions and asked for actions to be taken, why those were denied. We have yet to get responses from Alex Acosta, but it's clear that we have additional questions for the former Labor Secretary, and we certainly have numerous questions for the line prosecutors that were involved in making those recommendations. Palm Beach County will continue to be an important place for our investigation as we continue to explore and investigate the links between what was happening at Mar-a-Lago and, of course, Jeffrey Epstein. And to close, we'll say we look forward to hearing from Attorney General Bondi here in a few weeks, and that we continue to ask the majority to partner with us in additional subpoenas as this investigation moves forward and as we work to protect the survivors. And some of our committee members here in just a second, I want to just give some thoughts and then answer any questions. Now, we're here in Palm Beach County because so much of this investigation brings us back to this location. We know that the crimes of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, the horrible things that happened to so many women and girls, totaling 1,200, could have been stopped and halted had authorities here been listened to, had prosecutors who made recommendations to the U.S. Attorney had been listened to, had survivors been listened to. But time and time again, whether it was at the law enforcement level or whether it was at the U.S. Attorney's Office by Alex Acosta and others, that justice was denied and survivors did not receive justice. We know that that led to the additional abuse and trafficking of women and girls, including of Rosa, who you heard from today. And you heard her horrific story
And had folks listened, that would not have happened to her and to so many others. We also want to be clear that, especially after today, we want to hear and are demanding to hear from the line prosecutors and law enforcement officials that made some recommendations to prosecute additional names, to go after co-conspirators, and yet were denied those charges, and that evidence was pushed back because of decisions made by the U.S. Attorney at the time, Alex Acosta. Now, we've talked to Mr. Acosta in the past, and we have additional questions. And I think it's important for anyone that was involved in the case here in Palm Beach to know that while we have reached out to some folks to speak to us voluntarily, you will be compelled to answer questions when Democrats are in the majority. If you were involved in this case and tried to do the right thing and made recommendations to the U.S. Attorney to bring prosecutions, we encourage you to testify and to bring your information to the committee. But if you're unwilling to do so, we are going to compel that testimony because those survivors deserve to understand who and why decisions were made to not move forward with prosecutions that then led to the abuse of so many more women and girls. I'll also say that I want to reiterate to the Attorney General that we expect to see her in front of our committee in just a couple of weeks, and that we expect Republicans and James Comer, because it's his decision alone, to ensure that that testimony is recorded under oath and released to the American public. The survivors deserve nothing less, and I want to again thank them for their courage today to provide testimony under oath. With that, I'm going to turn this over to Representative Frankel, who of course hosted us here today.
Thank you. Thank you to Mr. Garcia and my colleagues. I've been trying to get this hearing here for many years, and I thank you so much for finally bringing folks here. Because folks, so much of the truth lies here, hidden in Palm Beach County, and we still have yet, under oath, heard from some of the key players. Barry Krischer, who was state attorney at the time, the two prosecutors he sent in to a grand jury room to debase our survivors. We need to hear from them, and I can give you another list of associates, law enforcement, state attorney employees who have some of the answers to the big question is, why did Epstein get such a slap on the wrist? Secondly, to Courtney Wild, a bill has been filed actually numerous times to deal with her concern that the survivors were not given notice of the plea and had any opportunity to weigh into that. And I'm just going to end by saying this, because what makes this so tragic and sad is how many lives could have been spared the agony of abuse had the prosecutors in Palm Beach County acted properly, or had they not been overpowered, I should say, overpowered by Jeffrey Epstein and his team of lawyers, politicians, business people, whoever, who obviously overpowered our justice system. And with that, again, thank you. Where are you? Thank you so much for bringing us here, and all of you for your attention. I yield back.
So, we're here at ground zero for where Epstein's crimes occurred. Crimes that were moral crimes, civil crimes, criminal crimes, crimes that I would consider really against humanity, given the systemic harm caused by really what was a global enterprise of trafficking girls. Impossible for me to not think about my own 17-year-old daughter. Again, you see grown women before you who are courageous in their refusal to be silent, but they were mere girls, 14, 15, 16, 17, talented artists, dancers, aspiring teachers, lawyers, models. Their bodies were violated, their dreams devastated, their lives irreparably harmed. When you are violated in such a way as a child, it changes on a very foundational and deep level who you are forever. Your ability to love, to receive love. But it's not only an emotional toll, and certainly the cost of trauma is a high one. But there are also economic expenses, an inability to pursue a job, to keep a job, 20 years of 30 years, 3 decades of legal fees that no one was counting on. And not only was their innocence corrupted and their bodies violated and their lives changed, their very rights were violated. The Crime Victims' Rights Act grants individuals who are victims of federal crimes specific enforceable rights, including protection from the accused, reasonable, accurate, and timely notice of public proceedings, and the right to be heard. It ensures victims are treated with fairness, dignity, and respect. Well, that did not happen. Their rights were violated. And I'm working closely with survivors for a legislative fix of restorative justice. That's what brings us here today, to learn from the survivors, to identify failures, to hold predators and abusers accountable. And although I commend the survivors for their courage, I look forward to a day where survivors do not have to relive their trauma in order to compel action from their government. And finally, although this is a fight specifically for justice, accountability, and healing for our survivors who deserve so much more than sympathy, which is why I'm seeking to advance